Now we're going to talk about the second house and the sixth house individually, what they represent, and also we're going to focus on how to interpret combinations that occur between the houses. How can you get combinations between houses? Houses are just areas of the sky, they stand still. Well, there's two ways you can get houses to combine. The first is by the positions of their lords. Every house has a lord because every house is created by a sign. And signs belong to planets. So the planet who owns the sign that makes the house is the lord of the house. So for example, if you take the lord of the second house and put it in the sixth, or the lord of the sixth house and put it in the second, or if you put the lords of the sixth and the second together somewhere, or if you put them in mutual aspect to each other somewhere, then you'll have interaction between the second and sixth house, and we want to talk about how to interpret that. The second way that houses can combine is not by their lords, but by their relative prominence in the chart. And in order to know that, you would have to calculate the prominence of the houses and then sort it out and see what the order is. It's a little bit difficult to do that. If you want that done for you, you can go to my website. I have a new report called The Houses of Life, and one of the key things in the report is this thing I call the DNA code of your houses, which is the sequence from positive to negative, most dominant on the sides and least consequential in the middle. You'll get a sequence of numbers. So if you have 2 and 6 or 6 and 2 in a sequence, or if you have 2 and 6 on the opposite ends of the code, then you're going to have 2 and 6 working together, combining together prominently in your chart. Yeah, so if you want to get that code for yourself, go to victorcara.com/H, and then you'll be able to order the report from there. Please do that. All right, now we know how the second and the sixth houses might combine. Let's begin the body of the video, the main part of the video, by making sure we understand what the second house represents and what the sixth house represents. Then we'll talk about how they combine. So the second house is literally the area of sky that's below the eastern horizon. And the sixth house is literally the area of sky that's below the western horizon. So it's pretty interesting. They're both below a horizon. So I'm sure they'll have something in common, but they're on the opposite ends of the sky. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of opposite things about them. For the second house, because it's below the eastern horizon, the second house signifies or symbolizes things which support whatever is symbolized by the eastern horizon. So this eastern horizon symbolizes the beginnings of things, because it's where the sun rises. And beginning means coming into visibility. So the second house is the thing which gives the stability and strength and ability for things to come into being. That's what the second house really signifies. On that note, it signifies the family. In a native's chart, in a person's chart, the second house signifies where they came from, what brought them into this world, the family. And also what keeps them in this world, their supporters, and the things which keep them alive, like their health and their wealth. And because the first house is the east, and the east is the beginning, the east signifies visibility, which means knowledge, knowing. Something which is knowable is visible. So the second house is like the grounding of knowledge that we have. And it's realistic oriented. It likes things to come into view and be seeable and touchable and real. So that's the second house in a nutshell. As for the sixth house, it's supporting the opposite horizon. So it is supportive like the second house, but it's supportive of everything the west represents, which is basically the opposite of anything the east represents. So where the east represents the beginning and the birth, the west represents the end or the death. And where the east represents the self, the thing which has been born, the west represents other people, not the self, the non-self. And where the east represents visibility, the west represents invisibility or the unrealism. So the sixth house is going to symbolize everything that supports or enables those three main topics: death, other people, and intangibility, invisibility. This is why the sixth house is famous as the house of disease, because disease is what leads to death. Disease supports death. And also, the sixth house is the most important aspect of what gives you sickness or health, and that is digestion. Now, the sixth house is also pro others, right? Because the West signifies other people. So supporting other people. This is why the sixth house is a work, chore, task, duty-oriented house. It's about our duties. It's about the things that we must do, that we're obliged to do for others. It's our duties to others. It's the work that we do for others. Hence, it also has a nature of being our indebtedness. So the sixth house is not really the house of wealth like the second, but it's the house of debt. And debt also means indenturedness. Indenturedness means servitude. It goes along with the duty and all that theme is how we are servants and in service and servitude towards others. Another permutation of the sixth house being supportive of others is that it's by default not supportive of self, supportive of others. So where the second house signifies friends, those who support you, the sixth house signifies enemies, those who support others, or those who are working against your benefit because they're working for other people's benefits or their own benefits. So people that will steal from you, people that will compete with you, people that will clash against you are symbolized by the sixth house. And finally, because the seventh house of the West signifies the sun setting, where things become dark and invisible, the sixth house, which supports that theme, means it's pro-invisibility or pro the setting of the sun, pro things becoming dark. So it's not going to be knowledge like the second house. The second house is supporting the rising of the sun. The sixth house is supporting the setting of the sun. So as the second house signifies knowledge or things becoming visible, the sixth house supports things becoming invisible, which means it supports confusion. So the sixth house signifies confusions, and therefore it also has to do with doubts, lack of clarity, worry, and hence it's actually a pretty problematic house. It's a house where we have to face problems. So now let's turn our attention to how to interpret combinations of these lords, which will be the same basic interpretations of if you have the second and sixth houses in sequence in terms of their prominence in your chart. Which once again, if you need to know that, you can get it from my website. You can get the report, victorcara.com/H. Now the first thing I want to bring out is that the second house is about family, and the sixth house is about duty. These are actually harmonious themes. So the dutiful and work-oriented nature of the sixth house goes well with the family-oriented nature of the second house. And this comes from the basic fact that both of them are supportive houses. The sixth house is supporting the west, and the second house is supporting the east, but they're both supporting. So there's going to be this commonality here, which is going to produce a good result. Commonalities always produce good results. So the person who has the second and sixth houses connected in their chart will be a person that is inclined to be dutiful. They're inclined to be reliable and responsible. They're good candidates for being a sound father or a sound mother or a good, important member of the family. Now that part is pretty simple, but the rest of interpreting the sixth and the second houses together is pretty complex. The reason is that the way symbolism works, the two sides of a coin are always on the same coin. So for example, with the sixth house, it represents debt, for example, and the second house represents wealth. So pretty much those are opposite things. But wealth is the absence of debt, and debt is the absence of wealth. So you can get wealth from the sixth house and you can get debt from the second house just by inverting them or bringing negative implications into those houses. So whenever something symbolizes something, you can get the opposite symbolism by an inversion. And that's why it becomes difficult when the houses are so totally opposite, like the second and sixth. When they're totally perfectly opposite, it's a bit of a synergy in itself. So it is quite complex to actually interpret the second lord in the sixth house, the sixth lord in the second house. What do we mean complex? It means it's very, very, very sensitive to the context of the chart. So let me say one rule of thumb for sorting out the grayness in the interpretations here is that to have the lord of the second house go to the sixth house is generally not as desirable as having the lord of the sixth go to the second. And I'll explain why as we do the interpretations. In terms of the house sequences, to have a 2 followed by a 6 is basically the same as having the second lord go into the sixth house. Let's get into some specifics. The first thing to bring up is that the second house is the house of friends and the sixth house is the house of enemies. So this is a clash. But if you have it going where 2 goes to 6, then you have friends and enemies. So your friends have gone to become enemies. But if you have 6 and 2, then you have enemies coming to be friends. So the way that classic texts often describe second lord and sixth lord and second house is these people have friends in foreign countries. So because also the sixth signifies foreigners because it signifies enemies, right? Other nations. So if the second lord goes there, or the sixth lord goes into the second house, then it's merging friends and enemies. So you will befriend foreigners, or you will make friends with people who are usually considered enemies. So one of the dynamics that goes on here in general is the natives like people you don't expect them to like and dislike people that you expect them to like. Another example to help clarify this is the second house is the house of wealth and the sixth house is the house of debt. Well, if you have the second lord going to the sixth, then that signifies your wealth is going into a debt. But if you have the sixth lord coming to the second, it signifies your debt is turning into wealth. It's coming to wealth. It's not that cut and dry, but I'm trying to put it in a cut and dry phrase so that you can see that 6 coming to 2 is a bit better than 2 going to 6. So generally speaking, the problem with the second and the sixth house is that wealth will transfer into debt, and then debt will transfer back into wealth, and it won't be so steady. But it's going more towards the debt becoming wealth if you have the sixth lord coming to the second, or the sixth dominating the second lord somehow, or sixth house supporting the second house in your code. So 2 first and then 6. Another thing that could possibly make this clear for you is that the second house represents health and the sixth house represents disease. So here you got a clash. They're both the opposite things. A basic rule of thumb is that if 2 is going to 6, it indicates illness. Your health has gone to disease. But if 6 is going to 2, then the disease is going to health. And then we have the one final thing to mention is the second house represents knowledge and the sixth house represents confusion. Which is very confusing even to just talk about the second and the sixth house combinations. It becomes less confusing when you look at an actual chart, hopefully, because, for example, if you're on the subject of health, you might see the condition of the sun and see that the sun is strong, and then that will not incline you to interpret ill health from the combination of the second and sixth lord. You'll go the opposite way. Or you may see the condition of Venus and see that it's weak, then you wouldn't incline you to use the wealth possibility of the second and sixth. You would go more towards poverty. So it becomes easier when there's a whole chart around to give context. In theory, it's a bit difficult to explain. But the last thing is that the second house signifies knowledge and the sixth house signifies confusion. If you have the second lord going to the sixth house, then the knowledge is going to confusion. It's becoming confused. But if you have the confusion lord, the sixth lord going to the second house, then your confusion is getting some knowledge. It's getting resolved. It's not literally that cut and dry. It's all dependent on context. If you see a great Mercury and the second and sixth lords are together, then the person is solving their problems, figuring out problems, good at maths, good at hard work, intellectual work. Especially if Saturn is also good. But on the other hand, if Mercury is very difficult conditions, Moon is in difficult conditions, Saturn is in difficult conditions, Jupiter is in difficult conditions, the second and the sixth lord combination is going to indicate confusion. That's really how to sort it out. But I just wanted to give you a rule of thumb to help a bit with the theory of the second and the sixth house. One other thing that I want to say about the house code, it's good to have 2 followed by 6. It's less good to have 6 followed by 2. It is generally good to have a 2 and a 6 on opposite sides of the code. Either one, whether you have 2 at the beginning or 6 at the beginning, doesn't really matter. And that's because you're flipping one coin and not the other. So for example, if you have wealth and debt, if you have like 6 on one side, that's negative debt, so it's flipped over to wealth. And then if you have 2 on the other side, that's positive wealth. It's stayed flipped on wealth, so you have wealth and wealth. So you see how interesting astrology is? But I hope this video at least sets you on the road to learning how to deal with these more complicated situations. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget you can go to victicera.com/h and support my work by getting one of these reports for yourself, which not only supports my work but also gives you a whole lot of benefit from it. So you can get interpretations of all the houses and what sequences they're in, what's most prominent, what's most positive for you, what themes from the houses are specifically most prominent and most important and positive, which are most negative, and you get this crucial code of what order the houses are in, what sequences they're in. So please don't forget to pick up that report, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and stick around and watch more videos and leave some comments. Thank you so much.